Chapter 6, Elder Daniel's Camp. The mood of everyone in the camp had lightened up over the last few days since Elder Zachariah's sermon, with the youth in the camp as much as it had with the adults. It was Wednesday afternoon, and the time had arrived for one of the clan's biggest weekly social affairs. Over the last few seasons, Elder Daniel's home had earned a reputation as the place to be on Wednesday evenings, in so much as the teenagers in the clan were concerned as much as the adults. Much of that being due to Joseph Daniels and his wife having the most teenagers of any family in the clan, with a total of 7 daughters and sons who all fell between the ages of 13 and 19, which put their family as the largest in the clan with 12 children altogether. The Daniels home was known as the place to go for fun. Every Wednesday afternoon, Joseph Daniels and his oldest sons would go out and hunt and fish for whatever they could find and bring it all back for his wife and daughters to cook up for dinner. Then they would have the biggest barbecue anyone had ever seen. Afterwards, everyone was invited to join in for music and games galore until the late hours of the evening. Many of the adults would come and join in also, as well as helping to provide some of the food and musical entertainment. However, there were a few of the adults, such as Elder Jonah or Elijah, would avoid the Wednesday evening gatherings at the Daniels camp altogether. Even if they permitted it, they still considered it to be a frivolous waste of time and seldom participated. By the time Caleb had arrived at the Daniels camp, the festivities were well underway. He could smell the food from quite a distance as he approached the camp. The scent of Elder Daniel's famous smoked bass and trout drifted along on the breeze with the smell of fresh roasted corn, hot breads, and Mary Daniel's equally famous hot apple pies. In his back pocket, Caleb carried his prized possession, a small handmade bamboo flute that his Uncle Saul made him for Christmas nearly 5 seasons ago. His mother had played a flute from the time she was a little girl and taught Caleb every song she ever knew, and Caleb picked them up perfectly within the first few months. Soon he was playing every song his mother knew, along with making up some new songs of his own. "Hey Caleb, where's your brother?" shouted Seth Daniels, who was standing with a group of the older boys playing a game they called Rack-'em, which consisted of pitching a set of dried gourds tied together with string and aiming them for a small 3-tiered wooden rack. The object was to string the gourds up one of the tiers to earn a score of 1, 3, or 5. A score of 5 could be earned for making the top rack, a 3 for the second rack, and a 1 for the bottom. The first team that reached a score of 15 would be the winner. Seth Daniels, who was about the same age as his brother Stephen, as well as being one of his brother's best friends, was what you might call the camp clown. Seth was infamous not only for his sense of humor and fun, but for his loud and persistent laughter, as well as the practical jokes he liked to play on just about everyone, except perhaps on Elder Jonah or Zachariah, whom he usually kept his distance from, since the time he accidentally set fire to Elder Jonah's supply tent last spring. Seth Daniels and several of the older boys were experimenting with making their own fireworks, and it seemed that some of them accidentally landed on his tent. Caleb slowed down as he neared the boys, watching the game and not wanting to disturb Zeke Daniels, who was just getting ready to take his shot. "He'll be by here in a few minutes, Seth. Our dad had some work for him to finish up on the north field first," whispered Caleb, not wanting to disturb Zeke's shot. "What, he's still working at this time of the evening?" boomed Seth. "What, is your dad a taskmaster or something? Come on, it's been a long day. Go grab yourself a plate and get yourself some food, Caleb, before it's all gone." Seth motioned toward the tables, which were set up in a large clearing by a makeshift bandstand and dance floor. "Oh, by the way, Martha's over there somewhere too," added Seth, grinning at Caleb. "She wanted me to tell you she was waiting for you to get here, and you better have your flute ready to play." Seth laughed loudly as he turned around to resume his game with the other boys. "Or you could come over here and join us in this game, unless want to go hang out with Martha and play your flute," yelled Alan Marin, who was lining up to take the next shot after Zeke. For a second or two, Caleb wanted to crawl behind a tree so no one could see him or sense his embarrassment. "Does the whole camp know how I feel about Martha?" he wondered. The sun was beginning to sink below the trees in the western sky as Stephen was busy finishing up his work putting everything away after plowing the north field, when he noticed his mother Sarah walking rather quickly over towards the corral, holding onto Caleb's backpack tightly in her arms. Stephen felt his heart stop beating as he drew in a deep breath, already preparing an explanation in his mind. That Caleb, he told me that he put everything away, he thought. What's going on, Mom? Stephen asked nonchalantly. What were you and your brother Caleb doing with my good oil lamp the other day? Asked a somewhat agitated Sarah, holding up Caleb's backpack with one hand and her oil lamp in the other. This tumbled out of his pack onto the floor. On one hand he was relieved, yet on the other he was angry at Caleb for not putting the lamp back where it belonged. I'm sorry, Mom, I thought Caleb had returned that where it belonged. Stephen continued putting the equipment away as he explained. I asked Caleb to bring some candles along on our trip to the river last Sunday just in case we had time to make some new arrows. I didn't realize he had also brought your oil lamp along in his pack until we were already out by the creek. Sarah stared straight at him with a slightly confused look on her face. Stephen realized she had no idea what he was talking about. We used the candles and lamps to heat the water up to help straighten out the arrows, he explained. Oh, I see, her expression softened. Well, I would appreciate it next time you and your brother go out. If you want to use a lamp, take one of our older ones, not my nice one. Your father made this for me. Sorry, Mother, we will, promised Stephen, grateful that his fib had worked. Sarah continued staring at Stephen as her thoughts drifted. How do you think Caleb's doing, Stephen? She asked. What do you mean, Mother? Did he mention anything to you while you two were out the other day, about the dreams he's been having? Stephen thought for a moment, and then shook his head. He never mentioned a word to me about any of his dreams. Stephen paused. Why, are you worried about something? He asked. Sarah looked down at the ground, seeming to stare straight through the earth. I just feel that God has great plans for you too, and, well, call it a mother's instinct, I guess. I want you two to be careful out there on your trips away from camp. We will, Mother. We can take care of ourselves. Don't worry, urged Stephen, trying to ease his mother's fears, but not quite sure what she was worrying about. I know you can, but Sarah motioned to the woods in the distance. There may be dangers out there now that we didn't have to worry about before. We've traveled so far and are so far away from where we began our journey. Sarah paused again, not wanting to worry Stephen and Caleb needlessly about things that no one was sure about yet. Maybe we will never see them, and they will leave our clan alone, Sarah thought, and then continued. Well, next time you two do go out, make sure to remind your brother to put things away properly afterwards. This lamp almost broke when I picked his pack up off the floor. Sarah added as she turned around and started back towards the camp, stopping suddenly and turning her head sideways towards Stephen. Oh, by the way, your father said not to worry about the horses. He'll feed them in a few minutes. You can head over to Elder Daniel's place as soon as you finish your chores here, reminded Sarah, smiling. Thanks, Mom. Stephen breathed in a deep sigh. That was close, he thought. I've got to have a talk with Caleb about putting things away. Caleb was sitting on the edge of one of the long tables, finishing up the last bite of apple pie on his plate when he noticed Peter Rickton coming out of the corner of his eye. There were several younger boys sitting on the other end of the table chatting away, including Martha's little brother Nathan, along with Robert and Sam Daniels, who were arguing over the rules of a card game they were just beginning to play. Hey Caleb, can I join you? Peter asked. Sure, have a seat. I'm just about finished anyway. I don't know about you, but I am stuffed. And that apple pie was amazing. Caleb nodded his head in agreement as he scraped the last bit of pie off his plate and stuffed it into his mouth. Yeah, Mrs. Daniels always makes the best pies. So, tell me about your trip out to the creek on Sunday. Did you catch anything? Caleb carefully wiped off his mouth with a napkin, placing his dirty fork and spoon on top of his plate and then pushing it off to the side. He took a large sip of his iced tea. Didn't catch a thing, not a bite even, Caleb sighed. Stephen said we would probably have better luck going earlier in the morning. Rotten luck, piped Peter, biting his bottom lip. Caleb noticed that Peter always bit his bottom lip when he had a serious thought coming on. Did you, Peter paused, see anybody else out by the creek? He asked. We saw, Caleb began and paused, not sure about how much information he should divulge to Peter just yet. A few tracks by the creek, it looked like 3 men and a small boy. They had passed through a few days before we got there. I bet they were from the McNeil clan, speculated Peter. My father and my brother Matt, Elder Daniels, and his 3 sons all ran into some of them this afternoon while they were out hunting. They even invited them to come over tonight and bring their families with them to meet everyone and have some food. Peter explained excitedly. You're kidding. Caleb's eyes widened. Nope, and Peter paused. Here's the best part, they're bringing their daughters too. Peter added with a big grin on his face, which caused his freckles to shake as he smiled. Goodness, Peter, is that all you think about? Caleb shook his head slightly and chuckled. Well, yeah. That, along with food and stickball, of course. Caleb and Peter both laughed loudly as the 3 boys playing cards at the end of the table stopped their card game, shooting an agitated stare towards Caleb and Peter. Caleb quieted down and leaned in close to Peter as he lowered his voice so that only Peter could hear him. Peter, did anyone mention anything about running into any other clans in the area besides the McNeils? Caleb asked. Peter began biting his bottom lip again. Well, I did hear my father mention something about scavengers being in the area, but that's all I remember, he muttered. Do you know something I don't know, Caleb? Caleb thought carefully, catching himself wanting to bite his bottom lip just like Peter. No, not really, just rumors. I guess these scavengers have a reputation as a mean bunch, and we should watch out for them, added Caleb. Not wanting to say any more, he decided it was time to change the subject. Hey, let's find out when the music going to start. By the time Stephen had finished up with all his chores, cleaned up and made it over to the Daniels camp, most of the food was nearly gone and the musical entertainment could be heard getting warmed up on the makeshift bandstand, which had been constructed near the side of a small shed that the Daniels had just completed last week. Stephen immediately noticed the large area off to the north side of the shed, where the Daniels family had already begun the construction of their new home. He could see they had already laid the footings and foundation to form the flooring. All along the perimeter were several large stacks of freshly cut wood neatly arranged and ready to use. Stephen was amazed at how far along they were, and in such a short amount of time. Why not? He thought, they practically have their own work crew. Knowing the way the Daniels family operated, it wouldn't surprise Stephen if they started pitching in to help the other families build homes as soon as they were done with theirs. Hey Stephen, it's about time you got here, came a familiar voice from the far side of the shed where Stephen noticed several boys were playing Rack-M. We need you over here, these guys are killing us. Hi Seth, sorry I had some things to take care of first. Work, work, work. It's time for some fun, hollered Seth Daniels, who had just taken a shot and looped his gourds around the top tier, which earned a yell of approval from the rest of his teammates. 5 points. Read 'em and weep. Seth hollered. Maybe you don't need my help after all, Seth, joked Stephen, who was now standing next to Mark Redding and Zeke Daniels. They were 8 points ahead of us just a minute ago, now we're tied, exclaimed Zeke proudly, wheezing a little bit as he laughed. Zeke was about a year younger than Seth and Stephen, and had asthma from the time he was little. Most of the time he managed to keep it under control, except when the humidity was up or when he got carried away laughing at one of his brother Seth's jokes or tricks. Hey Stephen, I just saw Nina Miller and some of her friends sitting at the dinner tables a little while ago. I think she's still over there. They're waiting for the music to start up again, continued Mark Redding, who was about 2 seasons older than Stephen and had recently announced his engagement to Seth's oldest sister Beatrice. She was asking about you. We promised her we'd send you over when you got here, he smirked. Mark Redding, or Marcus as his parents called him, was usually one of few words, but had a reputation as being one of the best marksmen with a bow or crossbow in the camp. You could always spot him in a crowd, with his long blonde hair tied up and sticking out the back of his brown leather-brimmed hat. Stephen often thought of Mark when he read the stories of Robin Hood or William Tell as a kid growing up. Seth and Zeke would often beg their father to take Mark along on any hunting trips they ever made, as they could be assured to bag an extra catch of rabbit or deer whenever he was along. This is probably what helped familiarize Mark with their sister Beatrice over the years, since Mark spent most of his free time socializing with the Daniels family after the hunting trips. Thanks, Mark. Well, it looks like you guys got this game under control now without my help. I think I'll go over to where everyone's gathering for the music and see what's going on, continued Stephen, who patted Zeke gently on the back as he prepared to take his shot. Several dozen boys and girls of all ages had gathered around the makeshift bandstand, which had been constructed in a large clearing east of the shed near where all the food and dinner tables had been set up earlier. A few of them had even brought some of their various instruments, homemade drums, guitars, and other instruments, including Caleb, who had brought his flute with him and had already started playing a song along with Mary Daniels, and her two oldest daughters Elsa and Beatrice had all brought their violins, two of which had been in their family for nearly 140 years. Joseph Daniels and a couple of the other men were busy preparing for the bonfire later, which had been set up nearby. "Caleb, will you play Blowing in the Wind for us?" begged Martha, who was sitting and listening to the music with several other girls at one of the tables near the bandstand. Caleb Elgin and the Daniels girls had just finished performing an arrangement of Mozart's A Little Night Music that Mary Daniels had taught all of them. Mary Daniels' great-grandmother, Julia Cortez, had been a conductor of one of the famous symphonies in North America years before the Great Cataclysm. Afterwards, Julia had made sure that all her grandchildren learned to sing, play, and read music. Along with saving several dozen books of music they had kept with them during the years at the Texas ranch in the South, they also managed to save a sizable library of various other books, including many encyclopedias and classic stories of literature. Julia Cortez and her friend Regina Rickton, Gina's grandmother, had been designated as the official teachers of the children in the clan. Over the years, Mary Daniels had carried on her mother's role as teacher of the children in the clan, also teaching, as many as were interested, how to play or sing songs and play as many instruments as they could, even getting some of the men who were skilled craftsmen to make new instruments for them to use. "Why, Martha, they would love to, but first let's get some of those boys up here with their guitars and drums to join in," suggested Mary, who was busy making some last-minute repairs to the guitar straps her husband had made for one of the boys. Joseph Daniels, Harvey Redding, and James Rickton had made themselves comfortable next to the bonfire at such a distance as to enjoy both the light and warmth of the fire, which was much appreciated, since at this hour the late spring evening had brought a certain chill upon them, as well as allowing them to comfortably enjoy the musical entertainment provided by Mary Daniels and her troupe of young musical protégés. "Well, tell me about your hunting trip this afternoon. Marcus told me you ran into a small hunting party from our new neighbors the McNeils. How did it go?" asked the curious Harvey Redding. Harvey Redding had been quiet for the last half hour, calmly whittling away on a piece of wood while Joseph and James had been arguing the finer points of home construction. The sudden question caught Daniels by surprise. "Well, we met Tom McNeil and some of their boys this afternoon about 3 miles northeast of here, on the other side of the creek," Daniels continued. "They were out rabbit hunting like we were. They seemed like a friendly bunch, so I invited them to come over tonight." "Do you think that's such a good idea, at least until we get all settled in here?" asked Redding. "Well, Harvey, you remember we discussed this very thing at last month's council meeting, right?" Rickton reminded him. Redding nodded. "Zachariah and the other elders told us before we came here last winter that we should expect to meet up with other settlers moving in. Most of the folks we've met so far have been decent folk who are trying to do the same thing we are, build new lives for their families up here in the old country." "Yes, I remember, but we still have to be cautious. Remember that group we ran into a couple of years ago when we were camped along the Mississippi River?" recalled Redding, waiting to see if Daniels and Rickton remembered the incident before continuing. "If we hadn't have been so quick at catching them in the act, and of superior number, well, who knows what they might have taken that belonged to us. I remember that. I shot one of them in the ass with my crossbow as he was trying to steal one of our seed wagons," continued Daniels, laughing a bit as he recalled the sight. "But Harvey, we got all our stuff back and they were just desperate for food," Daniels reminded them. "Besides, if we hope to stay here, it will benefit everyone to get along and be good neighbors, and that would allow us to trade and barter for things we are going to need." And one thing I'm going to need soon is more nails to start building a house. Well then, what about these scavengers' rumors we've been hearing about? Redding asked. Our neighbors to the east of here, the Williams clan, say that they're not very friendly. There was an awkward moment of silence among the men as the three of them looked at each other, then Joseph Daniels. Yeah, I guess we better bring that matter up to Zachariah and the others at the council meeting next week and see what they think, stated Daniels. Meanwhile, Daniels paused, squinting his eyes slightly to focus on someone he saw approaching the camp from a distance down the road in the dark. Maybe we can get them to tell us about what they know about these scavengers, noted Daniels, motioning slightly with his head towards their new guests. It seems the McNeils have arrived to take up my offer of hospitality. Daniels grinned. The three men stood up together and walked to the side of the road to welcome the Tom McNeil and his family to the camp. It seems that several of their own boys had also taken notice of the arrival of the McNeil daughters, and it wasn't long before introductions were being made, food served, and their new neighbors were being welcomed generously into the Daniels family camp. Now, if only all our meetings with our new neighbors can go this well, thought Daniels.
You have been listening to Caleb Elgin, The Rise of the Clans by David E. Farmer. Also available on Amazon Kindle. More chapters coming soon. Thank you for listening. Have a great day. Bye-bye.